I'm glad you noticed that. So we could all
it's
start over.
recording to the cloud instead of.
Hey, Doug, you made it.
Yeah, I might be rotating and doing all sorts of asymmetrical things. Well, I had to get a new phone, which is not something I like to do. I had my previous one for 6 years, and it wouldn't charge anymore. So this one charges, but I'm just now setting everything up. And on top of, I had a day off of work, so if I go in and out or disappear, that's my excuse.
But your screen is bigger.
It is?
Yeah, your camera screen is bigger than it was.
Cool.
It looks a little steadier. The image
and clearer. The image is clearer too.
It's newer technology. I like the stories that you guys shared before we noticed the recording was not recording.
Yeah, so I kind of feel bad about that because it was good intro actually, but
we could always go over it again. I think these actually have these stories about how we disentangle from these addictive patterns.
Because
we all have them. Let's face it. Too much YouTube videos, too many donuts, all of these kind of things. We cross a line, and we know we've crossed the line, and we continue to do that over and over again until one day we just say, no, this I have to stop. And I think it usually has to do with one's identity. A behavior has become confused with who I am, and then I have to make a change. And how do we do that? I think Bateson was saying you have to go to a higher level.
Yeah,
you can't change the behavior with another behavior if your identity is involved. If you can do that, if your identity isn't caught up in drinking, oh, I just drink too much. It's very different from saying, I am an alcoholic. Yeah. That's a statement about identity. And so you could say to someone who has a behavioral issue, you just need to change your behavior or hang out in a different crowd or take up golf or something else instead of this behavior that's not good for you. And that might work. But if you have an identity that's caught up in this behavior, that won't work. And that's why I think that's what he's talking about with this symmetrical and complementary tensions, how we work with that.
Mm-hmm. So because what I was going to suggest that we do, since I didn't really have an intro prepped, is maybe, because you said it was a very challenging chapter, maybe we could go and dig into why you found it challenging or what the issues are about, and let's work it through together.
Great.
Those things. And also, I also wanted to say that, because I think what you're saying about the Bateson and these different habits that we have, and that is very important. But I also think the link to Nora Bateson's text, which is the one about leadership, is worth exploring and giving some time to, because I think it's related in a kind of backhanded way, and I think it'd be worth doing that as well. So
that's a great idea. We could even start with her if you would prefer. I think we did a liminal leadership review, didn't we, Doug? Wasn't there a paper on liminal leadership that you posted by Nora?
Yeah, that was in response to the video that you posted, and which was taken off, and I didn't get to view, so I looked around for other resources.
And if someone wants to read the poem, that would be great too. Nothing's changed. Someone feels comfortable doing that. So whichever way we want to go.
Well, let me start with the poem. That sounds like a good idea. Nothing's changed. Everyday emptiness in the palm of my hand, cupping the shifts of temperature, air resting on folds, holding nothing, was just that, singularly receptive. Then there was something, not much it seemed, in my hand, solidly there, with contact, a circuitry of signals and new places to edge understanding around. I let go of the something, and nothing was not what it had been. Nothing looked the same. But newly filled with an imprint, it outlined another realm, ghosting emptiness, crinkled infinity, forgetting nothing of the presence it contains, is granted independence, giving weight where there is none, pulling not there into full focus, mocking that there is nothing to push away, while collecting invisible knowings, nothing's changed. That's not an easy poem either.
No.
I think I read this one 2 times, and having it read, which we often note, changes the whole texture of this. And
it does.
Even during the actual reading, I imagine as my palm of the hand was sensing what was going on there. Nothing has changed. It's very interesting. I like that. I'm having a minor epiphany as we
start, and then taking that into this idea of. So I must admit, this idea of leadership, which is not leadership, because we've already discussed it here a little bit over the last few weeks, almost tangentially. It's not entirely new, but I have to say it's still a bit of a shock to read it. It's because it's so different from the cultural perception that we're surrounded with. Everything is all about individual leaders and their messages and their style. We talk about leadership style, and we have heroes, of course, and superheroes. We have all these films about superheroes, and we know that's fictional, but we tend to think that these fictional superheroes are some way a reflection of a real element in our culture. And and Nora is sort of saying, that's not the way it works. It's shifted. The things aren't what they used to be, and we need to shift with the times and recognize that leadership isn't set up on the individual basis anymore.
Right.
And it's such a shocking kind of statement, although clearly you can see the underpinnings of something new and interesting going on in that expression. So anyway, so because I even in my own writing, I do feel, in fact, I'm kind of against heroes, and in my own writing, my characters aren't heroes in that sense, but I do have a villain. And of course, the argument about leaders also applies to the argument about villains. In a sense, if you can't have leaders, you can't have villains either. You can't have individual villains in the same way that one might used to have had them, right? So anyway, I'm just sort of throwing that out. I don't have a lot to say about it.
I think that's great. I actually have a lot of strong feelings around this, but I also want to hear it from Doug. Doug knows something about leadership. He's had to take over the cafe as it started to implode. We were having I think what I'd labeled a frame crisis. Everyone has lots of interests, and some similar interests, a lot of different interests, but we're having trouble coming up with a frame. And I was extremely resistant to showing up at the cafe just to chat. I have too many things that I'm very passionately interested in getting an outcome. So I don't want to waste a lot of time. And for other people, that wasn't a waste of time. That was a very creative use of their time to just, whatever comes out of anyone's mouth is okay. Something interesting would follow. And of course, I realized there's something in between my personal preference and that other person's or group of persons' personal preferences. And I believe this is the in-between that Nora is paying attention to. That it's not in this institution or that stupid leader or that institution over there or this family or something inside a person's head it's something in between all of those entities or organizations that we need to pay attention to. And I found that, I think that's extremely compelling and almost impossible to do at the same time. And in a way, I feel like our technology is providing us with many opportunities, but also it's providing us with many opportunities to fuck up in ways we've never been able to do before. I think we're seeing both the blessing and the curse of this technology, just in our own experience. And as I break out from Facebook, and I came to to Cosmos through the people who were here and through the relationships, primarily with Marco. And he wanted to do something else, although it wasn't obvious exactly what that was, but he and I were both disgusted by Facebook. And I think there is a shift that's happening in how this, in social media, and its capacity to reflect upon itself. We can't blame Zuckerman or blame the US Congress or blame Trump or Hillary. We have to sort of look at how are we participating as participant observers rather than passive sitting back and watching other people do their thing. How can we, create together conditions for doing something else with social media? So I think we're in this grand experiment, and I think it's very challenging because I think there's a deep need in us to say, in almost every circumstance, who's in charge here? You walk into a restaurant, you have a frame, there's the host or hostess, there's the cashier, there's the tables, there's the menu, there's the waiter. You know what's going on, except that there's a breakdown, and someone brought you something that you didn't order, or an order is really slow at being brought to the table. Then you want to know, where's the manager? Who's in charge here? And I think this is such a human thing in just about every circumstance or any frame we're in, we get involved in socially. If those unsaid, unspoken rules of order are upset in some way, we immediately want someone to be in charge that we can authorize to correct this. And I think this is the challenge for us, because no one's, maybe our organizations and our institutions are just too slow and clunky and bureaucratic to keep up with the ecological crisis that we're facing now. And I think, what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to moan and bitch and complain about our leaders who are failing us terribly, or our institutions? I feel like we're going to have to do something that may make us very uncomfortable, and we can't just be fearless leaders. That doesn't work. We can't be followers either, because that doesn't work. So it's somewhere in between following and leading that I think we need to pay exquisite attention to.
I was just thinking, because it's related to the Bateson. As a culture, we need to hit bottom in order to transform the culture. So this is why I think there's a link between these two texts. It's maybe not obvious, but kind of implicitly there.
Yes. I think we've hit rock bottom, actually.
Not sure.
I think
rocks all the way down, though.
Yeah, rocks all the way down.
The bottom never ends. We need a big enough rock to hit, I suppose.
Yes, I don't want us to hit rock bottom. I want to do whatever we can to use our collective imaginations to.
That's what you
to
said
transform
in
the system.
the conversation with that I titled Generations, but you were with 3 other individuals, and it's very politically, philosophically minded conversation. But at the end, you essentially reached that. At least you concluded that you would rather not hit that rock bottom. You want to utilize technology as you see fits what you need. You want to utilize society in the way that doesn't promote destruction. So
that's right. And I think at the end of Doug is talking, Geoffrey, about a conversation that hasn't been uploaded yet, but between me and Dave Orloffler. He's a theorist who's in Berlin. He's a sociologist. And we think some of us studied one of his papers. So we got together with him and TJ and a new friend, Barrett.
Yeah, so I was on the second part of that conversation, right? So.
Oh, this is a new one. This is after that.
Okay.
Yeah, you were there at the one at the cafe. This was one we had not last night, but the night before last.
Okay.
And I was riffing about, and I realized at the end of the conversation, I realized we're not individuals here. And this seems to me very much the influence of Nora Bateson and reading her is that I realized that if I see myself as a separate unit and you're a separate unit and we're coming up with ideas that we're trying to share, I don't think we're going to make it. I think we have to recognize we aren't separate units. We're relational fields and we're in relationship, and I'm not in control, nor are you or any of us, but we have enormous influence.
Yeah.
And I think that's where our flexibility and our power is in our ability to influence and to resonate, to vibe with each other and go in these in-between zones where we're not sure that, I think what she's calling that imaginal space where it's, basically nothing at all. But our imaginations, we can become, I think, transmitters through metaphor and story and narrative and those magical qualities that, that we can have in face-to-face communiques, but that sometimes it's hard to do in writing. I think writing is something else, which is extremely powerful. And our memories are very hooked into that digital kind of way of working. So can we do both at the same time? And I think that's what we're doing here. I mean, we read together, we reflect on our reading.
We write together increasingly through the group, yeah.
I missed last night. I tried, but evidently there's a miscommunication and the time changed. So I wasn't.
Yes, the time changed. Yes, right. Yeah.
I showed up, but no one was there.
You should have done your own monologue or something. Just on the spot.
I would spare you guys that way.
I was going to say what's interesting as I think about leadership, I've noticed a shift in the university environment over the last few years. It's very subtle, and there are still lots of people on the old way of doing things, but increasingly, like I have colleagues who sort of younger colleagues, right, who are not necessarily charismatic leaders in the old sense. That's not the way they operate, but they're very good at bringing along or opening up discussions to a broad group of people and making sure that the people are there at the table in order to discuss things and move things forward. When I do things, I tend to be more structured, and it's more of me that I put out there. But these people don't do that. They step back more and they let the group do its thing. And at first I found it a little bit disconcerting because they tend to talk a lot more. It tends to go on longer, the meetings, because I sort of start to get frustrated and I want things to move ahead, and so I start stepping in and pushing certain items. And if you leave them to do their things their way, it all takes a bit longer to get there. But it is more democratic in some sense, and I think this is the kind of communal leadership style that Nora's talking about. And there is a kind of a shift in the milieu towards this kind of approach rather than the old, and I still see the old style. So people who take on director roles in the and so forth, and do people who think that the role of a leader is to tell other people what to do. And of course, if you've ever done any kind of leadership function, you very quickly learn it's got nothing to do with telling other people what to do. It's got to do with motivating other people to do things on their own, on the one hand, and being of service to the community on the other. And those are the two functions that make a leader in our world work, not telling people what to do. But there's still lots of myths, and people misunderstand the role until they get into it somewhat.
Right. I think we're all familiar with the submission dominance that happens in groups, especially if there's an alpha male or alpha female who wants to hog the microphone. So we have, and there can be something comforting in that, because then we say, okay, let them lead, let them do their thing. And then we're going to talk behind their back, and we're going to undermine everything they want to do. So we get our revenge on those who want to grab the microphone. And so, but how can we create a group life, organizational life, where that submission dominance thing, which I think sort of reflects our experience of being in families, and it's a very parental child dynamic. Mm-hmm. How can we avoid those kind of parent-child dynamics, and also the sibling rivalry kind of thing? How groups will, if there's a designated leader, will rally, will compete with one another over who gets the attention of the leader. So we'll all compete over that person's attention. And
so maybe we need to shift our parent-child relationships to Balian style.
So I've been gathering and collecting parenting styles, not based on parenting books or the doctor's orders. It's been Gregory Bateson, it's been Nora Bateson, it's been you and Johnny here talking about how to raise a child without talking about how to raise a child. And Nora in her text I didn't notice the word leadings, which I think is a good way to describe the shift in leadership to the collective. It are the leadings. So if we are to, you mentioned the students or teacher, the younger generation of teachers that you're experiencing, Geoffrey, as kind of not progressing as you wish, but at the same time they're inclusive of some sort. And I would say that maybe they're collectors of leadings, but it takes a good leader to determine which leadings to say, okay, this is a bad idea, or just let it die out, or let the alpha male, female do their thing, and instead of talking behind their back, let them have the waking up moment to say, okay, well, this is not working, nobody's responding, let me try something else. And somehow this ties in, I would like to tie it in with this real life versus the techno life that we experience here. And in a lot of ways, we have our leadings. We want certain readings, we want certain groups to be handled a certain way. And to the extent that it's possible on a site that's continually trying to cater to the needs of the collective, we can take those leadings in the directions, and they can safely die off without nobody's going to be in fisticuffs, or there's not going to be some dedicate, like a entire college will not shut down because our Bateson group didn't meet for the week or something like that, or the class won't dismiss and everybody give up. But with that real life versus this is pretty speedy. Like this, what I've experienced here in a year is maybe 10 years of education in the university. That's a good way to put it, I think.
100 years.
And it's still not enough. It's addicting because it's the most positive, world-changing, eventful process that we can imagine, but our feet are not on the ground, or that we don't have physical industry or institutes forming because of this. In the drop of a hat, this whole thing could just disappear because the power went out for a week and everything got zapped. I don't know. We could call each other up, but it would likely, with friendships that are long distance relationships, they would kind of fizzle out and we'd have to go local and do what we do. But so we're accelerating in such, with this technology, we're accelerating in so many ways, but at the same time, the demands of real life and slow time and the daily grind, it's hard to get, this is my addiction. This is our addiction in a certain way. So I don't know how we can get rid of the addiction, or but I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I'm trailing off.
No, I want you to come back to the parenting, because you started on the parenting and then you moved on to something else. But I think, I don't know whether or not you're able to articulate that, because it's not.
I would like to,
easy, yeah. But it would be nice to hear more about that.
Well, with my 5-year-old son, I'm one to, before he was born, I'm one to see what he will need to be a part of society, be a part of the world, and then take that knowledge, kind of forget about it, and allow that to be within the way I interact in the moment, if that makes sense. And perhaps that's how we all work with anything, but I have no demands I expect from him, even to the point of, so we're equals. There is submission and dominance based on his developmental stage, of course. So I take that into account. I have tried different routines, not too much physical discipline, but some to an extent that worked zero on him to the point that he resisted. And this was friendly physical, not friendly, but it's still, even the most friendly of discipline can be traumatic. So I scratched that idea, and I've resorted to lots of talking, trying to talk it out, how we do in discussion. And he's not ready for everything, so I'm learning to cut back on what I can and can not say to him. But there are so many contexts in which we meet as equals. Or if we go back to the leadership and the leading, children, we are all children here. We have our leadings because we have the childlike mind that allows us to have those branchings. So as a child, he has those leadings times 20. With anything he sees, it can become anything else. So my leadership skill comes in as a parent, which you do a lot of this in, Geoffrey, in the subversive pedagogy, that idea there of, well, you're entering in and you need to question the dominance, you as the teacher looking on to these students that you don't quite know. The dominance comes from experience that you have, but it's open-ended, and lots of questioning, lots of jumping into an equal playing field. So it's like clean language clears the space is one way to reach that playing field. And from there, that's how I feel intergenerationally we can be on the same page, or technologically here. I've often been the background student or the child in a lot of senses. I'm younger than maybe 90% of those who frequent here. So I've but I've been treated as an equal. I've not been said, well, you don't have the experience of my generation, so you don't know shit, and just shut up, Doug. But it's been an encouraging ride. So there's the encouragement to extract out our best potentials. So here, or with children, we have to extract those leadings, and with that comes a whole new, more and more branchings. That's all I can think of right now.
Yeah, so you said something that I think is very, very important, and that is the relationship around teaching, because I think in a way, even though I think family is the root of all our behaviors, and therefore ultimately things have to change in families in order for things to actually change in the broader world. To get things to change in families, the key is our teaching system, because that's where the information passes from one generation to the other, right? In a social, civilizational kind of role. And I think what you're saying is very interesting, because our teaching styles, even in the universities today, are very focused on a prof talking down to the students. That's the model. I'm not sure whether it's the same way in elementary school. Probably not. But there is a bit of that, and we also, we've had the discussions here because, of course, both Gregory Bateson and Nora's Bateson's discussion about the failures of the educational system that we have, and which is something that ties into our own, I think, understanding of the issues around education. And we know the education system has to change, but of course, how to get its changes not easy, because it's such a massive undertaking that is reinforced at so many different levels in its current mode of operation. So it's very, very difficult to change the educational system. But the focus on individual perhaps it will change on its own over time. But perhaps we can do something to accelerate it. So maybe it's this, I think this shift from person-centered teaching to a more collective undertaking in the teaching environment, maybe itself the strongest driver of change. Mm-hmm. If one can get people to, and I think to some extent, as I say, even in the university environment, I see it changing. So it's mm-hmm. not like nothing's going on. It is going on. It is a cultural change at a very large scale, I think, going on in the world this way.
So if it's taken in the context of the virtual environment and the real life environment, and that ability to change with the technical. So I'll use an example of my own, it ties in with the two of you again and my own child. And I do have this leading, which is not articulated yet, nor do I wish to articulate it just yet, because I know it's ill-formed and it would die down, is to introduce Miles to the site. On one of the Plenum reading groups, he came on, and though he's a 5-year-old, what do you expect for him to criticize or comment on a drawing or his own drawings? But that interaction between my son and you, Geoffrey, is something that doesn't occur in the physical environment unless I'm tied into the university or have direct connection to that. And that's where we can make this shift from the teacher-student to even the student flipping over to the teacher role. So the online environment, there's things like the Khan Academy, there's all sorts of MOOCs and online environments, but there's no intergenerational activity going on. And perhaps the reason why that change is so slow is the fear of having your child on a website, or not being supervised, or there's so much danger for children, I suppose, or that's at least one factor that may be preventing that. But yeah, if we lead by example and others see that, oh, a child can discuss a book or start a readers group or write a poem and have somebody introduce that, or participate with adults in a Gregory Bateson discussion and perhaps throw in insights that you couldn't get from Gregory Bateson or your own thinking, because, well, that's part of the demands of the text, is this childlike, fresh mind that can branch out into separate ecologies before it gets cut off automatically by our own mind. But that's one leading that's related to what you're talking about, I think, or one potential.
I want to let Johnny jump in here.
Well, this is very stimulating. I'm doing a little sketch. I'm doing a Doug here. Doug often listens and he sketches at the same time. So, and this sketch is really klutzy. It's a little too small, but it's right here. I have 3 I's. This is a personal pronoun I, and a shared attention that happens. So the personal pronoun I becomes a we. And there's a sort of perforated line around these personal pronoun I's that have become a we. And there's a bifurcation point. It splits in 2 different directions. And it could it could go towards this beautiful forest, the ecological forest and trees. Bateson says the beauty of the forest has to do with that relationship. Or it could go up here into this, it looks like a dollar sign. So we're at that bifurcation point. Is the collective attention of the we going to move towards the big bucks and maximizing our returns? Or are we going to move towards that ecological self that resides within all of us, since we are a very unique and special kind of nature? But all species are special in that way. And I think we're in this together. And I think the more of us can pay attention to how we're paying attention, that I think is a new art form. It's an old art form too. Theater, dance, music, it all is about collective attention. The baton of the conductor, as he raises it, the orchestra gets quiet, the audience gets quiet, and then the music begins. That you have to get everyone's attention so that a group attention can be shared and enjoyed. I think this is where we get, as Bateson says so beautifully, that the beauty of a forest is something bigger than yourself. And that is an enlivening kind of attention that's shared between you and all the other creatures that are observing you. There are 1,000 eyes out there and they're looking at you. And you can sort of sense this. There are other kinds of, or you're walking through that forest with the idea of like, how can I turn this into money? I can level it, take the profits, from turning this forest into lumber. And the indigenous people who live off of the forest then have no way of making a living. But often what they do is after the forest company, after they've mowed down the forest, the indigenous people will use the abandoned tractors, the abandoned machinery, and they will break it up and sell those parts. It's a pretty grim kind of scenario, but unfortunately, that scenario has been imported all over the world. It's sort of what I think globalization is about, and what globalization is currently continuing to do, unless enough persons are saying, wait a minute, I'm not going to be a passive participant. I'm not going to collude. And I will not participate in this I'm going to stop it if I can, in whatever way I can. And it may be very small. It could be just in staying centered in a conversation with someone who you consider to be your opponent, and just taking a deep breath and relaxing and paying attention to the quality of what you're sharing with this person. So that's, I think, bringing a sense of aesthetics, that aesthetic awareness into our relational spaces could be very rejuvenating. I don't think the Republicans and the Democrats in the Congress are going to be able to do this anytime soon. So I don't think we should wait for them. This is where I think these the technology is a wonderful bliss-inducing addiction, as you say, Doug. We can just bliss out on all this wonderful information being prepackaged for us, and we can just take it in. But if it's diversity without integration, I don't think it's going to do us much good. More diversity is I think, part of that postmodern kind of just get more, me, you know. And I think we have to find ways of integrating all of this diversity. And I don't know how to do that except with the kind of efforts that we're making here in using this technology, but not for the purpose of selling anything to anyone. We're not turning this into, I'm not going to instrumentalize anybody, or they're not going to instrumentalize me into some sort of money-making scheme. But that I'm driven by aesthetics, for beauty, and responsibility. And we have an immense responsibility for the future. And it's not my future. I'm not going to be here. But it's going to be Doug's children are going to be here. And so I feel that responsibility. Because biologically, I have no children. But in a sense, they're all my children. You know, I have a huge responsibility, as we do, all of us do. And I feel like that's where we have to cut through this narcissism and this nihilistic crap that it's just going out and making a buck. That's all that it's all about. So anyway, that's my spiel. But I think, and just to make a quotation here from a very Heinz von Forster, I'm quoting from his book on second order cybernetics. I also think this is a move. We're moving from first order to a second order. As we look at making the Yankee dollar, what the world is interested in, that's a very first order kind of formulation. And it's a highly manipulative one. And a instrumentalizing tendency is to, like, how can I use this system over there, which I'm separate from, to maximize what I want, to a second order, which is much more, I'm a participant and an observer among other participant observers. So we're now studying observing systems, which is a very different, it's a second order. So now I have, now I'm in a relational space with significant others who are in a relational space with me, and we have a different kind of purpose. And I think this is moving towards, I think that's that bifurcation point I think that Dave Loeffler is pointing to in his work, is how can we disentangle ourselves from this first order, move to a second order, and while preserving first order, because we can't have a second order without a first order. And I think this is what's so beautiful about Bateson's work, is he seems to be appreciating there's something in between the first order and the second order. And we can't reject that which is in between. And anyway, I'm just going to quote this because I think it's a beautiful quote from von Forster. He's talking about the Batesonian connecting pattern. Pattern comes from Papa, Pater. It is the father whose stamp is printed across everything, always looks exactly the same. That is the pattern. This I would like to compare with a mother, a matrix that embeds. In this way, I've gained parents, the papa, the pattern that connects, and the mama, the matrix that embeds. The papa is responsible for the pattern, And the mama makes sure that the pattern falls on fruitful ground in which it can blossom, thrive, and spread. The pattern needs a breeding ground, one might say, that is maintained through the womb, the matrix, the mater, the mama. I feel these two poles belong together, the Batesonian pattern and the Forsterian matrix. I'm always thinking about women, aren't I? And I just wanted to add, I wanted to ask Davor last night, but I think this question was a bit ambitious. Is there a relationship between Bateson's pattern and von Forester's matrix and Loeffler's operational chains? Because if you watch the interview that we did with Davor, he talks about operational chains, which I think is very interesting. How we can move as the hunter-gatherers. Can you imagine what it was like to go from a spear to an arrow, bow and arrow, to a trap? The cognitive and shared processes that had to happen to move from this to a trap. I think that's extremely suggestive. So anyway, thanks for giving me a chance to rehearse these ideas.
Was that reading from the beginning of Heaven and Earth?
Yes, it's
I checked that one out, and I haven't reached the part where you quoted from, I don't think.
It's on page 135.
Okay.
But I think it's very instructive. I think also Bateson may have emphasized the pattern and the meta pattern. I think Nora definitely emphasizes the matrix, perhaps the meta matrix. So I think those are other possibilities too. And those operational chains that Davor talks about. Of course, he's drawing upon Piaget, but I think he's also drawing upon Gebser, because Gebser talks about the structures of archaic, magical, mythical, mental. And what happens next is hopefully the harmonizing of all those previous structures. But we're in that stage now, I think, where we're still instrumentalizing nature and we're trying to dominate nature rather than, and to dominate those previous structures. Eliminating magic and mythic is not such a good idea, but how can we harmonize those previous structures so that then the rational can flourish with these previous structures? And I think that would be something very new in our human history. I think this is what Dave was saying, is that we've never had the conditions for this kind of thing. I think Gebser was thinking about this as well, and probably Bateson to some extent, and certainly Nora. We're at this, we've never been here before. And what do we do when we don't know what to do? This, I think, is a great challenge.
So to take up Heather's language from our discussion last night, we need the feminine space making in, I think she meant in complementarity to the masculine instrumentalism, right? So, which I thought was a very interesting phrasing of these things. Anyway, I did want to say, so it's maybe a kind of a non sequitur slightly, but I was at a book launching this week, and it was poetry partly, and in a bookstore, right? So there were quite a large crowd of people there, and it's an old friend of mine from many years ago who's quite productive. He's kind of an interesting guy. He's a medical doctor who works in the far north, but he's also a poet. So he's very interested in the life of the indigenous people and the difficulties that they face in the north in the current environment, and high suicide rate, for instance, among young people up there. But anyway, the point I wanted to make was that while I was listening to the poetry, I allowed myself to move. So you have this group of about 30 people listening to the poetry. Everybody's, motionless. And here I am moving around in the background, swaying while I'm listening to poetry, and just carefully kind of moving around in the back. And it so much enhanced my listening of the text. So this is grounded in my subversive pedagogy ideas, right? So, but it's this idea that growing idea I've got, that this idea of sitting still and paying attention is not what we need to be doing. We need to be moving in, maybe not too disturbing ways, because you don't want to, negatively impact everybody else's attention. But I do think people need to learn to move when they're listening to things. And
it goes back to Erin Manning too, with the Audi types and her Sense Lab, saying that some of the greatest insights have come from the programmers and those that are not able to communicate in certain ways, but you might hear them as they're pacing across the room, able to articulate in that movement.
Yeah,
that goes back to the leadership styles. But,
well, that's what I was going to say. Is it's related to the leadership, because if you are sitting still and listening, you are essentially focusing on the one person, one leader idea. But if you are moving around and in the periphery and doing other things in the periphery, then you are not maintaining this one. You are automatically in a much more collective kind of mode of operation. So I think it's a style of listening and attention. Even so, moving when I'm listening to a lecture on poetry is one thing, but when I go to a meeting and I'm listening to people, I'm now systematically doing other things. So even in these conversations where I'm talking to you guys online, sometimes I'm looking at other stuff. And what I've noticed is increasingly that it doesn't interfere. I mean, it can get disruptive, but a lot of the time it enhances the listening and the understanding. And so I'm sort of experimenting with this as a new way of listening and working. So even in conferences, I'll go and I'll be working on a writing exercise while I'm participating in a conference with other people. And I find that my ability to participate is in no way disrupted by the fact that I'm also writing, so I use the fact that I have peripheral attention on something else, and I'm shifting my attention from one thing to another rather than being completely focused on one thing. So I do think it's relevant to the discussion about leadership.
I'd like to give one quick example of what I experienced with my particular Quaker group during the silent meeting for worship, which is an hour of silence. And if you feel the presence with you, whatever the higher power, then that will be the articulated message. But there is no leadership in Quaker group. There's various committees and the clerk that is kind of the underling of the meeting rather than the leader taking care of business. But I like this particular group of Quakers because they're non-traditional, they're highly not anti-Christian or non-Christian, but they seek alternate ways of inspiration. It might be a good way to phrase it. But during the silent meeting, we get a lot of feedback. We might be notorious for not being Quakerly because we have 2 or 3 individuals that will be in the back kind of pacing, one because of medical problems, but she will kind of just jump into the middle or stay on the side and break into dance or a poetic expression of how she feels. Others will sing songs all of a sudden. And so people perceive this as ego. Like if you're on the outside, maybe a Quaker visiting, they'll see this as just like, oh, this is a big mess. This is not what it's supposed to be if you're a Quaker. You're supposed to seek from the silence to reach that of God, but to actually hold that of God in everyone, there's various modes of expression. So I applaud you for dancing and prancing in the background, Geoffrey, during the reading.
In Quaker eating, I tend to be a singer, so I often sing because I'm trying to break in a little bit on my tendency to, when I sit in Quaker meetings, my intellect wants to go, and so to shut my intellect up, I sing.
There's something about, you're talking about the silence, and Geoffrey moving while he's listening to at a poetry recital. And I think Gregory is referring to this, the forest and the trees, and something that embraces the person walking through the forest and the trees and all the creatures that are in that forest, in a kind of participatory way of being, very magical in a certain way. I think that there's that whatever that is, which puts us into that space, that field effect, that relational space, is going to be very different. It's going to be registered individually and probably in very different ways. And I think it's when we try to standardize our responses that we end up in religion, science, fundamentalist science, which can be just as fundamentalist as religion. And I think these are the kinds of epistemological concerns that Bateson was having. Because, Doug's way is going to be different. Doug with the Quaker group is going to be different from Geoffrey with the poetry group. And my experience of hanging out with certain people, certain groups. So I think we take our experience of groups and we bring them here to this group. So all of those different groups, from family to volunteer work to political work to being in a chorus or being in a performance space with others, that's all we're going to bring all of that experience with us, including our traumas, where we were told by the group to shut up and sit down. We may have had humiliating experiences. I'm sure almost all of us have. Our educational process is full of humiliating experiences where we're told to shut up, sit down, don't look out the window, pay attention to me. I'm going to give you an A or an F. I'm the one in control. So we're all we've all had those embarrassing moments in public where we were shamed or we were flunked, and for having a different kind of relationship to that which is beyond us, yet is also makes all of us possible. So I think this is the very big challenge right now, and I don't think we're doing a very good job of it collectively, even though individually we've all had moments, I think, of breakthrough, and we tend to idolize those breakthroughs and those who had them, and we worship the leader or the artist or whoever won the Academy Award or got the Grammy. But for everyone who gets the Grammy or the Academy Award, there are millions of people who experimented, risked, made conditions possible so that beautiful artwork could come through that particular individual. But that particular individual, it came through them. But I think we get into a very deep narcissistic ditch. We think that person is not just a channel for something way beyond them. And we can marvel at that. And it certainly takes enormous skill sometimes to pull up great achievements in the arts or in the sciences, and a lot of preparing. So I think these breakthroughs come through often prepared minds. And I think we can do that. And we are doing that. We can't make the transformation happen, but we can prepare our minds for that eureka. And if we have a eureka, great. What are we going to do with that eureka? Because if we don't do anything with it, it quickly vanishes. That's been my experience. And so if I see a eureka, if I see someone coming up against something that's really difficult, and they're making some progress with that, I want to celebrate that. And I want to say, let's pay attention to that. And I think my effort here in using clean language has been, let's listen carefully to the patterns, you know, in the person's language. And then if we could get a person to make a sketch or a drawing, it becomes externalized. And then it becomes, I believe, something that's our shared attention. And I feel like it moves to something much deeper or higher than the typical chat fest kind of thing, where we get very quickly into those parental, submission dominance kind of patterns, or into an instrumentalizing mode, which is like, how can we make some money off of this? So anyway, I'm just sharing that with you because I think we're at that bifurcation point, and we could bifurcate in a way that could be wondrous and wonderful for many humans on this planet. It would be wonderful if we could have some of the things that we were talking about in the Dave Loeffler conversation last night. But it could also, be disastrous. So we have a lot at stake here. And I think Bateson was very sensitive to this. And I think Nora is. And I think the ecological movement that Bateson and Mead initiated, really, coming out of the Second World War and the horrors of that, I think we're still the beneficiaries of their pioneering spirit. And I also think we have something to add that they weren't able to do at that time. So I think it's up to us to do it. I don't think anyone's going to give us permission. I think we have to say, okay, it's up to us.
So if I might say, maybe we can move back to the Gregory Bateson discussion for, I'm kind of slightly loath to do that because I think this other discussion but it kind of comes back anyway. So, and the alcoholism context is slightly depressing. But I did want to say, I did find it interesting that Bateson talks about the relationship between ontology and epistemology in this article, because ontology is something that is a current interest in research circles. Like, for instance, I took part in a half-day workshop about 2 weeks ago on ontologies for disability studies. And this is new for people in disability to be looking at in a systems way. And science, in the scientific world, epistemology has been it's kind of been absorbed into the background, but nobody talks about it anymore, really. They talk about it in a technical way. That is to say, scientists are aware that their theories, their way of looking at the world, a disciplinary focus is epistemological. And they use that as a kind of a backdrop discussion of these things. It's Bateson's work done, and then absorbed and integrated in such a way that it all drops back into the background. But the problem, of course, is that, as we have been discussing, you need to bring the background back up into the foreground in order to change things. And this idea of just assuming that epistemological issues are handled by ongoing scientific practices is wrong, because in order to break out of the existing molds of doing things. We have to bring things all back to the surface. And I thought the Bateson's discussion about the relationship between ontology and epistemology, and the fact that when he uses the term epistemology, he's actually talking about both. Very interesting, because the way most people talk about epistemology today in the science world is they're only talking about epistemology. And they use the word ontology for something very, very different. They're not so different. You know, it's clearly not so. Maybe it's a personal thing because it's part of the academic milieu and the conversations that I'm involved in that world. But it was something that struck a bell with me. And then, of course, maybe we could talk a little bit about what you found challenging about this, John, or Doug, if you had issues about it as well. So.
Yeah, I'll just briefly state that the singular focus of the alcoholism and alcoholics was depressing. Yeah, but at the beginning of the call, the two of you before the recording started were universalizing it into addiction in general. So it was nice to hear your own epistemological ontologies, however you want to phrase it, of your own experience of how you dealt with Johnny with smoking and dieting for Geoffrey. And I wanted to mention my smoking habit too has ceased, except I still purchase 1 pack each year as an anti-New Year's resolution. So I get my pack of cigarettes. This year it was supposed to last throughout the year, as opposed to the past years when I say I want it to last. So I have a highly addictive personality. This year it lasted 1 month rather than 2 weeks. So I'm slowly getting there, but I want to get to the point where I can do the ultimate goal of smoking when, like, at a party or drinking. Smoking and drinking go together for me, but I do neither because I cut it off of my life. But I didn't want to go there. I just wanted to state, yeah, that the text was, it is a difficult one for me as a newcomer.
One of the things I thought was interesting, so this symmetrical versus complementary. And he kind of says the symmetrical is bad and the complementary is good. But you were just talking, Johnny, about the dominance, submissive aspects and how pernicious that can be. So that's the complementary on the bad view. And Bateson talks about the Balian culture, which is symmetrical in a good way. So so these are not quite so clear cut as he suggests in the paper, I think. Perhaps in that particular context.
Yeah, I could certainly talk about my personal problem with cigarettes and how actually it's not a personal problem, it's a socio-cultural manifestation. And I think that's often the problem with addictive patterns, is we try to isolate the problem in an individual rather than recognize the collective nature of our addictive patterns. And I think we've done a lot of good work on codependency, and people are much more alert to the collective nature of these kinds of, designating a victim, and the victim sort of holds the tensions of the family structure and manifests them. And so the family doesn't have to deal. It can just look at the victim or scapegoat. And, we can, we have a black sheep in the family. So we can all project onto that person our own, our blind spots, when we're not paying attention to our own behavior. So I think these kind of family dynamics, end up in our institution and our organizations. But I think there's something suggestive here in this. He's talking about AA differs profoundly from such natural mental systems as the family or the redwood forest, because AA has a single purpose: to carry the AA message to the sick alcoholic who wants it. And the organization is dedicated to the maximization of that purpose. In this respect, AA is no more sophisticated than General Motors or an Occidental nation. But biological systems, other than those premised upon Occidental ideas, and especially money, are multi-purpose. There is no single variable in the redwood forest of which we can say that the whole system is oriented to maximizing that variable, and all other variables are subsidiary to it. And indeed, the redwood forest works toward optima, not maxima. Its needs are satiable, and too much of anything is toxic. And I think that's what we're dealing with, this the idea of unlimited growth, which our economy seems to be producing these symbols of, like the yam that gets bigger and bigger and bigger and loses its nutritional value, and our addiction to oil and to the gross national product, these shared symbols. And I think our addictive patterns, too much of anything ends up being toxic. And we have lots of sugar, fats, and oils. Our food is full of cheap, sugar and salt is cheap. And, it's in all of our food, and people get addicted to it. And it's bad for everyone's health. Not just those who get addicted, but everyone's health is affected by the overuse of antibiotics. I might not use antibiotics, but if someone else does, the relationship of our whole species to the microbial world is shifted. And there are then going to be microbes that are going to get smarter than these drugs, and they're going to be sometimes lethal. And so people who never used antibiotics are going to be confronted with these challenges to the human immune system. So I think we all have our own weaknesses and strengths in dealing with addictions or changing behaviors. But I think it's very challenging when we start looking at, working with groups, when it's not obvious what the goal is, when they're multi-purposed. And so we come together with these groups with an intention to study a particular text, or to perform something, or to brainstorm around an issue. And then we go off into our own little wherever we go, and we try to apply some of this. And I think then we come back, hopefully enriched by our experience, and we can enhance our theory and our practices. But it's tough when you're working in a system that's addicted to certain kinds of behavior. I'm, as a gay person, I was raised, my gay experience, almost all of it happened in a bar, because the public was hostile to any expressions of same-sex affection, and you could get killed if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And if you got it wrong, you would be in real danger, a signal. So I think that kind of, so the bar is where a lot of the culture happened. And that was great, because it was very creative and flowing, and lots of energy, and a lot of ideas were shared, and theatrical events and marches and demonstrations. All of that happened, usually started in a bar, even though it moved to a conference room, or it moved to a church, or it moved to a hospital, or it moved to a school. All of that did happen. Other contexts were engaged, but it often started in a bar. And I saw a lot of addiction, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of drug abuse. And I also noticed in my own relationships how codependent people became in supporting or becoming a rescuer of someone who had an addictive problem, or being authoritarian with others who were addicted. And I think for me, it's about that authority, that persecutor, victim, rescuer triangle, and how we all get to play all those roles. We rescue someone, we persecute someone in a punitive way for behaving a certain way. So it's rescuer, victim, persecutor. And I think these are the relationships, if we can be aware of this triangle and this drama triangle. I can't remember the theorists who came up with it, but I found it very useful. If you can be aware of the drama triangle and get out and stay out of the drama triangle, that's great. But if you do get into the drama triangle, know that that is happening and treat it as a gift, because there's something that you can learn and others can learn by getting into the triangle and getting out of it. And I've seen this in our groups. I've seen this dynamic happen, and I've tried to pay attention to it when it does happen. I think there's a relationship between this drama triangle and Bateson's binds, double binds, perhaps triple binds, and what happens in our group lives when we get addicted to rescuing others, or we get addicted to being the victim. Someone take care of me, please, you know? And I think this, or persecuting others because they can't get with your program. So anyway, I'm just sharing that with you because I've noticed this. And I've also noticed it poignantly with long-term friendships, which I had to end because I realized I'm not going to rescue this person or any person ever again. I'm going to just, you know, nor do I want to persecute, nor do I want to be a victim myself of other person's needs to nurture me in ways that I don't want to be nurtured. So I'm just sharing that with you guys because it's painful to confront these codependent tendencies in oneself and in a relationship that's very valuable to you with someone you love and with groups. If you see this happening, I think it's great if you can recognize the pattern and blow the whistle and say, what happened just now? Because I think this has become a pattern. And if people can say, yeah, it is a pattern, and I can recognize it, and I can stop doing it, or I can do something else, or we can come up with another routine, that's great. But if persons can't do that, you got to get out, because you just can't save other people. You know, they'll reach out, save me, save me, save me, and you grab their hand, and they'll pull you in. They'll pull you into
that. That works if they're not part of your family. If you're part of your family, then it gets very difficult to extract yourself from it, right? So, a couple of things I was thinking. Maybe Doug, I don't know. I don't want to. I have a tendency today to talk a lot. Maybe every day.
But if you're allowing me to speak, I'll speak of. Off the script, off the chosen text again, and take it into the real life and virtual, and how connected can we be versus how easy it is to just shut it off and be detached. And I'll use John as an example because I know he doesn't mind when he encounters someone speaking with a forked tongue on the site or on a recording. There's, like he's saying, there's that immediate reaction that sucks him into the drama triangle, perhaps, or that divide there. And in those cases, what does it mean to be a friend? So I personally can say this with everyone on the site. I've written off the site to all of you, or I've had dreams about you. I've sung songs about you in my drives to and from work. But the example with Johnny is he stepped away from the site for a little bit, but I also remained silent as a friend. I didn't say, oh, don't worry about this, it'll pass, type of thing. But at home, physically, I woke up and I was having trouble sleeping that night. So I went for a quick jog at 4 a.m. and I was taking my phone with the recorder and recording thoughts at that time, and I wanted to post that to Johnny, but then I had second thoughts, and but they're really heartfelt, personal letters. Can even consider them love letters in a certain higher sense. But I never sent that to John. He's not heard them. They might be on my old phone now, so I don't know if I still have access to them, but that that divide was there with the technology. But if I was, say, living in the apartment next door to him, and this happened in real life, then I too would probably be sucked in the drama triangle, or I wouldn't be the self that I'm allowing myself time to reflect and be a good friend. So how does this tie into everything else? I don't know, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I don't think there are any rules. Well, there are rules, and we can break them if we want to, as long as we know that. That's what we're doing. I think with our complex, unstable systems, best practices are something that we sometimes have to leave behind because they tend to support the status quo of a system that is no longer operating that way. And I believe we're all becoming, we're no longer becoming what we were becoming. I think we're shifting very quickly into something else. And we're all in transition. And I think this is reflected in our leaderships and the coalitions that are traditional, like the Republican and the Democrats, just do not work. And I believe we're in these frozen binaries, which are our politics and our media and our educational system has promoted. I think Bateson's calling this Cartesian. This Cartesianism runs very deep in us. And he talks about this in the last paragraph, that Alcoholics Anonymous, he says it's not the only way to live correctly, or their theology is the only correct derivation from the epistemology of cybernetics and systems theory. So he's saying this isn't going to work for every alcoholic or every alcoholic system. It's just a way. And I think that's important because I've known people who had benefited from AA and I've known people who haven't. And I've known people who would go to AA for one kind of addiction, then they would create another kind of addiction to something else. But he says in this last paragraph, if we continue to operate in terms of a Cartesian dualism of mind versus matter, we shall probably also continue to see the world in terms of God versus man, elite versus people, chosen race versus others, nation versus nation, and man versus environment. It is doubtful whether a species, having both an advanced technology and this strange way of looking at its world, can endure. And I say amen to that. And in these liminal zones, which I think you're describing, Doug, which you may, as a very sensitive person, you may pick up on patterns in individuals and in groups, and you found your own way of processing that. And it's a matter of your responsibility, how much of it, if any of it, you want to share with others. And there's always a risk that it can backfire and be misunderstood and misconstrued. There's also a risk if you just keep quiet, say nothing at all. So I think, I remember once you said something about being silent, and that triggered a real phobic reaction in me in one of our communiques, which have been very, very helpful. Because I know I have blind spots, and I know others can pick up on things that I miss. And vice versa. I can pick up on things that other people miss. But I remember, I think you unintentionally triggered me when you say, maybe silence is the best thing. I went, no. Silence equals death. In my world, it's not a good idea to be quiet. You have to, and especially if you're seeing any bullying behavior, you don't just sit back and let the bully do whatever they want. You step up and you smack them really hard, and they stop usually. But I don't know. But I don't know that that's a rule that everyone should follow. I'm just saying that's been my personal experience.
It was intended to be a meta comment in a certain sense. There was someone else who was very silent during that call. That voice, they were having a rough day.
Right.
So I probably should have just simply said, "Let's let this person speak," because I've noticed a lot of fidgeting and smirking and odd behavior. But anyway, so
that's why, and that's why I've invited everybody. That's why I've asked that when we put these up on upload these events, that we don't use, that we use the gallery view, the speaker view, which is one face, one voice at a time, rather than having 5 or 10 heads on top of each other. To me, it's amplifies the Cartesian split in every one of us. And I watch these because I study my own blind spots, because I see how much I missed in conversations, because I'm paying attention to something that may be valuable, but I'm also not paying attention to something else that can be valuable. But when I see too many little heads trapped in this Cartesian grid, I can't read it. It makes less and less sense to me. I can't make meaning because I can't make any sense of it. I think this is the danger of our technology too. So I'm just sharing that with you guys. So whoever uploads these, and maybe I'll be uploading them someday if I learn how to do the technology, please put this in. Is it gallery view or speaker view? Doug,
I have to say I like it the other way though. I like the because I can read the group. When I'm looking at the individual person, I can't read the group.
No, I mean, in this situation, this is fine. To see multiple images of people is fine, because I'm just talking about when we're looking at it on YouTube.
Yeah, but for me it's the same thing. But anyway, I kind of like the group, and that's why I tend to pick it.
I have to take responsibility. I just won't watch these anymore. That's how bad. This is how intense it affects me.
But that goes back to,
and that's fine with me. I will let go of this situation. I will let go of this situation. I'm letting my preferences be known. Other people have other preferences. Then we have to make choices. And
that goes back to our paper on, well, you just quoted how AA is not the only way. He's Gregory Bateson's open to that idea that this is one way that's really working based on this environment in our current context, current culture, whatever. But 200 years from now, AA, there might not even be, there'll be all sorts of other addictions to be more concerned about than alcoholism.
Well, I think it's an aesthetic because to me, it's the forest and the trees. If I'm looking at 10 heads, one of whom may be talking, another head is looking out the window, another head is playing on their smartphone, another head is eating something. And to me, that is not relevant. To me, it's the voice and the person with their face and their voice simultaneously having a rhythm, having achieved some kind of rhythm, and the relationship between the verbal and the nonverbal in that person's communication is very different from, for instance, if I'm in an audience, when there's someone next to me who's opening up a piece of candy while the singer is playing their solo. I can just go, shh. And that person may or may not be quiet, but at least I have some capacity for maintaining the quality of my attention, even when I'm with someone who doesn't have that quality of attention. But I think it's the shared quality of our attention that makes performances work, because we are able to put aside in those best performances the grumblings in our stomach, or something I ate that didn't agree with me, or something that I need to do tomorrow and I have to do my laundry later on the day, all those other things that are on our minds. And that can become put aside so that this can be something sacred. And I'm paying attention to this person right now and nothing else. That's my preference. But I can also understand that other people like to watch all that stuff. I think it's, and that's fine. But I also have to make a decision what kind of relationships, what kind of aesthetics, and I can do other things. I don't have to do this. I mean, You know, I don't have to watch these videos and take notes and think about the different kinds of patterns in this group life, because I can't do that. But I understand other people, if that's important to them, and for me, it's a threshold. It's I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do it. But if I'm going to do it, I have to do it in a way that I can then bring that to the group in a way that's useful. Because if I'm not making meta comments, if I'm giving feedback and making it important that I give good quality feedback to the group, I need the tools to do that. And if the group doesn't want to use that meta communications, that's fine. I don't have to give it either. I can sort of say, I tried, I did my best. And if it's not going to be useful to others, that's fine. But I think that's where we're at in these kind of group dynamics. We're in a situation where we're being bombarded with mixed messages on a grand scale that we're not able to process very effectively. And I think some of us who are sensitive to this have a hard time sleeping. And we think it's our problem. We have insomnia or something. And actually, we're just picking up on all kinds of messages that were not processed. And I think this is, we each have to figure out in our own way how much of that can we tolerate. And I can't tolerate very much of it anymore. I mean, there was a time when I was willing and able to do that. I'm not able to do that anymore. And I'm feeling the need to unplug, to tell you the truth. But if I'm going to stay connected and keep plugging in, I have to let my preferences be known, and other people can do what they want to do too. I mean, I'm not trying to come from a authoritarian or persecutor kind of thing. I'm just letting, let's just put it all on the table in a very Batesonian way and let the system reorganize itself. But I think it's when people are silent and don't speak up, or have a preference that they're not letting people know, and then getting mad at the group because they're not respecting their preference. I think that's where we get into trouble, because it's not other people's, that's not their job, is to make other people. I'm not here to make everyone comfortable. I do my best, but it's not my main purpose. I have multiple purposes, and I assume everyone else does as well.
So I will take your preferences into consideration, but I won't promise to always do it that way.
That's fair. And I won't always promise to pay attention to what's going on here. I might not show up. I'll be doing something else.
I wanted to come back to a couple of things from the Bateson text that for me are really important. And I guess they're kind of important for me to remember in my own life. So the first thing is this, idea that he says that the alcoholic, or the addict, let's say, in a more general way, is actually attempting to move to a healthier state when they are consuming their so that their actual personal relationship state is unhealthy, and the drinking or the drug taking or the dieting or whatever it is that they're doing is an attempt to move to a healthier state. So I think this is important because, we have a very judgmental approach to people in these situations. And I think it breaks that judgmental thing to recognize that while from the outside drinking for an alcoholic may look, well, and it is an extremely destructive behavior, but it has its own logic. That's the point. And for the person who's stuck in that situation, the drinking is in a way, a certain way of moving to a healthier state. And then Bateson's argument about that is to get out of that vicious circle of, because what's going on is the sober person is drinking in order to deal with issues that is stuck in the sober state. To get out of it, you have to move to a higher level so that you get out of the sober drinking cycle, right? Which is a cycle, right? So in order to do that, you have to go to a different level in order to step out of that. That is the sort of, in a nutshell, what he's saying, without actually telling you how to do that, which is the tricky part. The other part that is related to this, but I think is also really important, is that the part of the system can never have any form of control over the whole. Now, this is a fallacy that is widespread throughout our culture. Everybody thinks, and he does that clever analysis of the whole idea of the person with the axe and the tree, and the person is cutting the tree, is chopping down the tree. No, that's not what's going on at all. There's a relationship between the person, the axe, and it's, as you said, each person, each individual is a relational field, and it's the relational field that's manifesting itself, including all the economics of the thing, and so it's not it's not agency in this sort of this idea that the person is cutting down the tree is a complete misunderstanding of the way these dynamics works. But of course, we all use that misunderstanding, and it leads us into this fallacy that we have control over these systems of which we are a part, and we don't. And the whole planetary system within which humans are currently in trouble is because human beings still believe, even the ones who want to fix the system, who want to deal with the environmental crisis, are assuming that by human actions, you're going to, by doing things right, we're going to get there, right? But that's not but Bateson's very clear, that's not the way it works. It's not by doing the right action. What you're doing is you're doing the same thing as the alcoholic who says, well, I'm stronger than the drink and I'm not going to drink. Well, by doing the right thing with regard to the environment, I'm going to fix the environment. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way for the alcoholic, and it doesn't work way for humanity dealing with the environment. And we all of us here fall into that trap all the time. It's not an easy one to think ourselves out of. So I do think it's a very, very important, and I'm not sure, I wish I could find a way to sort of hammer it home for myself so that I can stop doing that, because our language is traitorous to us. It leads us right back into the trap every time. So I wish I could figure that out, but I don't know the answer to it. But anyway, those were my axes to grind in a different sense than Bateson's.
Well, this is very challenging because I'm very drawn to the study of binds and double binds, and because my socialization pivoted around binds and double binds, and so I was at a very early age, since I was raised in an extremely violent culture, I was very alert to the violence before it happened, and I was very sensitive to just very, very subtle things in the environment and people's expressions, the tone of their voice. And I knew when it was coming, so I could dodge. I could get on the table, or I could hide in the closet, or whatever, or I could break it up. Sometimes I could throw my body in front of an aggressor and stop the aggression from happening before it happened. I was also an older brother because I had 3 younger brothers, and I had to defend them constantly. If a bully beat them up in the culture that I was part of, I had to, as the older brother, negotiate that. So if someone beat up my brother, I had to go out and beat up them so that the honor of the family could be maintained. And so constantly my brothers would run to me and say, Johnny, so-and-so beat me up. They hit me. And so I'd say, they did. I would go over there and I would smack the shit out of, you hit my brother? And I'd beat them up. And one day, the person that had beat up my brother was the boy in the neighborhood that I was having a love affair with. So I had to go to the guy. We were about 12 years old. He and I were having this affair, and he had beat up my brother. So I had to go punch out this guy that I was in this affair, that I was having an affair with, a very secret one. By the way, this was a long time before Gay Lib or Stonewall, actually. But I remember that feeling of like, I have to defend the clan, the tribe. This is my job. And I also have tender and loving feelings for this person I'm getting ready to clobber. So I realized how these kinds of dynamics get recirculated and recycled through each generation. But I remember what happened after that. I went home with my brother, and I beat the shit out of my brother for making me beat the shit out of this guy that I really loved. So these are the kind of things that I can drop now as an adult. But I couldn't do it then. But I can do it now. And I will. I will no longer defend other people or fight other people. They can do their own thing. And I can withdraw from media when I feel like it's getting toxic, rather than trying to make it work if it doesn't work. So, but I think it's important that this little issue about the speaker view or the gallery view, and just say, okay, when Geoffrey has this response and John has this response, what do we want to have happen? It's just paying attention, I believe, to this dynamic. And each of us bring to this dynamic something different that may be based in some sort of traumatic history, or maybe not. So I think that's where if we can hold that, pay attention to it, we might be able to go to another level. And of course, it isn't about creating new rules or new standards. I don't think we need to standardize this. So I think this is a very Batesonian kind of process we're engaged in right now. And I think Bateson would acknowledge this.
So your fisticuffs was your attempt at fixing the environment, I suppose.
I'm sorry, what?
The fighting, would that be considered fixing the environment?
No, it was about my identity. It was about my identity. It was about preserving my identity. I had to preserve, and in order to preserve my identity, I had to protect those that I loved.
Right. Well, I guess I'm trying to connect this with what Geoffrey was talking about. So, in a certain sense, you were righting a wrong or fixing the environment in that sense. But you later said, obviously, the physicality doesn't work when it creates that double bind. And
I don't beat up people anymore.
No. So
very peaceful.
There's the level of experience. So as adults, we learn what we can and can't do to fix the environment, I guess. Same goes with any addiction. We learn what we can and can't control, and that which we can't control, perhaps that's when we give up to that beyond, that higher power that we wish we could always be in. And perhaps that's how the answer to Geoffrey's question of if we can't fix their environment, then what is retaining that higher power? But then at the same time, we can't live in that realm. We go from the second order back to the first order because we have to survive in what our day-to-day activities are, or interactions with others who live in that other culture or environment.
Right. I just want to add something that it's not fixing the environment. It's about the persons in an environment and preserving the quality of the relationship of those persons in that environment. I don't reduce the persons to the environment. So three of us are in an environment, and we have certain behaviors that we engage in this environment. And then we have capabilities and that are expressed through behaviors in an environment that we share. And then above capabilities, we have beliefs and values and identities, and that which is beyond our identity. And that may be shared and may not be shared. At those higher levels, I believe Bateson and many other practitioners, we need metaphors. And that's where our mythologies come from. We have different kinds of metaphors, and which metaphors are shareable and which ones, are not shareable is, I think, part of the negotiation of this private-public dynamic. What do we decide to bring into a public sphere, and what do we decide to maintain privacy? And I think this is a extremely volatile time right now, because we're all under, there are great environmental pressures upon us and our relationships that, we need to redirect our attention to things that probably a lot of people are not paying attention to. And I think this is what Deborah Loeffler was, happened in our discussion last night. And maybe something that happened in your conversation with Heather last night. Unfortunately, I missed that. But I think the wonderful thing is that we have these videos. For those of us who are interested, I can watch a video for something I wasn't able to attend, and I can make meta comments about that. I did not attend this, but I had these responses, and I could share that response to the group with those persons, and if they want to read it, that might be of use to them. Also, if I'm participating in an event and I missed a lot of things, and I inevitably missed quite a bit of what went on, and I can watch an archived video of it, I can say, oh, wow, I can see that I missed that, and I missed that, and I can see that person didn't hear this and didn't hear that. And that could be a way of reflecting upon group life, which I could never have done before without this technology. That's what I think is wonderful about this technology, is that we can start to reflect upon a self-reflexive group capacity. We all, as individuals, we can reflect, hopefully, upon ourselves and our behavior and our beliefs and values, but can we do that as a group? And I think this is why this is such an interesting experiment, a social experiment that we're embarked upon, because I believe if we got a little more sophisticated by detecting these patterns and these meta patterns, and as they get embedded in our matrix, what would happen next? And I believe this is what keeps me coming back to these liminal zones, sharing them in public, creating affective space, affects, rather than just coming out of concept land, which I believe is also has huge risks if we just stay in concepts and we don't, and we use our conceptual educations, which is we're basically focusing on concepts and creation concepts, and divorcing them from this messy middle, the excluded middle, these affective zones. I think we're going to be really quite handicapped, like shooting ourselves in the foot and trying to run a relay race. It just isn't going to be very effective. But anyway, thank you for this opportunity to work in this Batesonian kind of space, because I think he really encourages this attention to binds and double binds and how we work with them. I don't think there are any rules. And I think this is what he stressed over and over again, is that you just can't create a standard and try to apply it in a cookie cutter fashion.
Maybe we could pick up, because I don't think this is the right time and place to discuss the gallery versus speaker view, but I would like to understand more what's going on there, and maybe work out between you and I don't know whether it's a conversation
I do have a comment on that briefly before maybe you jump into something else, if that's okay.
No, I'm okay with it. I can release it, actually. I'm not that invested. Now that I've expressed it, I don't feel like the need to take up side.
But I do value your ideas and your understanding of things so much, Johnny. So I sort of feel like I'd like to learn more from that, because you're usually right. I mean,
Well, I'd like to jump in real quick.
You usually have something that you have to say that I need to listen to, is what I'm saying. You know?
Sure, and vice versa. You need to really be very aware that my personal phobia is not widely shared, and so I have to respect that and be more gentle with myself and gentle with others when these differences happen, because I don't want to curtail anyone else's options because of my own. And I don't think this. I think this is a phobia that I have developed over time. Noticing the difference between looking at one face while they're speaking and watching the tone and the gestures and the sensing the energy in their bodies. What I can see of their body, actually, I can only see from the neck up. But I think it's interesting. And also the backgrounds, the people where they're sitting and the quality of the light, or if they're in the shadow. I think those are the kind of analogical things that Bateson, I think, paid attention to, rather than just the digital kind of discourse, the language games that we all play. So anyways, it's fascinating, and I don't want to overstate my position, because I really think that, there's that circle, and there's A, and there's B, and there's the line between A and B, but the line that divides A and B is not in A or B. I think that it's that A-less, B-less kind of space, that middle, excluded middle, that we're trying to create a new kind of logic, and new kinds of subjectivities, no doubt, will start to emerge as we start paying attention to this. So I'm just using this as a kind of rehearsal for, the larger and more difficult kind of binds that we're in, like the Republicans and the Democrats, and the dying oceans, and the topsoils that are eroding, and all the debates about the gross national product. To me, so much of what's debated is just like who stole the fake pearls. I mean, it's like, who cares about what they're debating about? But I think the real politics is happening right here, when citizens like ourselves are putting aside time and energy to study these really difficult topics. And I think hopefully there can be some kind of butterfly effect. Thank you.
So I've lost what I wanted to say, but I might be able to regain it. So your feedback, anyone's feedback, we'll focus in on this issue of speaker view versus multi-person view. And I guess Marco and Geoffrey and I have tried to fix the environment to where it would automatically have both available. And it's as easy as that, but it's not possible with where we spend 15 hours just trying to figure out how to get it automatically uploaded, and then that has problems, so that's more problems. So we just say, well, screw it, and it is what it is, and we all accept that. But so the higher power for me right now, if I was alone in the world, then I would have to resort to some other higher power, perhaps, to get me out of my addictive modes, to get me out of the environment, to change my environment. But you speaking, you're providing feedback, so the collective is perhaps our higher power here.
Right.
And these various feedbacks need to be heard.
That's right.
And though we cannot change the environment, we can progress towards that change. I had a lot of other things to say that's tied in with the complementary and symmetrical, whatever. I think I'll stop there.
Because in terms of the technology, I mean, ideally, you would cut the video together so that at the time it was the individual faces, and at other times it would be focused in on the person who's talking. But it takes such a lot of time, and we do so many of these videos, and it takes such a lot of time to cut them together that we simply don't have the time to do that.
Right.
So we have to choose one modality or the other, and we could put up both, because that is also a possibility.
That's way too much.
But it's twice the memory, and somebody's paying for this. I'm not quite sure exactly who. I know I do contribute a little bit of money, so maybe I'm paying for it, but I don't know. So, all of that costs money every time you double the memory storage.
Right.
So even though we could put up both, maybe that's not the best approach either. So I'm not quite sure what the way forward is. That's why I think the discussion is important to have, because I understand your issue about needing to focus on the person and listen to them. But I also feel this sense that of needing to read the group. And so that's why I would say if you had the time, you would cut it so that when you needed to read the group, you saw the group. And when you needed to focus on the person, you saw just the person. But we don't have the time to do that, right? So this is the issue.
This goes back to your von Forster quote, the Pater and Mater, where the quote said, the matrix that embeds, that's one side, but then there's the pattern that connects.
So I was going to ask what that reference is because I was trying to look it up and I couldn't find it. So
well
is
also
Forrester?
I'll post it, but it's
okay.
Heinz von Forrester, I think.
Oh, okay.
Is that correct, John?
You did talk about it another time, I think, but I didn't.
And I'm sorry, but I will have to go. I do have to get back to work. I'll listen in on my drive back and maybe make a comment. But
I have to go too.
Stimulating discussion. So sorry to jump off real quick here. Yeah,
and I think sometimes some of us have to say farewell to a certain way of doing business. If you've been raised in a face-to-face kind of culture and you've achieved certain satisfactions with that, I think the technology can simulate that, but it isn't the same. So I think so we go to, there's one-to-one, and then there's group, and then there's workshops, and then there's the poetry reading or the writing group. And I think we're trying to do different kinds of groups, and sometimes it's more didactic and sometimes it's much more affective. So I don't think there is a way of standardizing this yet, and I think there's and I definitely don't want to put any extra demands on others' attention, because I think to make this happen, I just think it's just important to let others know that this is my preference. And if others have other preferences, I'm okay with that too. And we have to, look at how much time and energy do we want to put into this. There may be other ways of using our attention. And so I'm okay with that. But I also know I just can't look at too many. I have to moderate how many talking heads I look at every day. Just because it's distorting my
I got that.
It's not ecological for me. I think we all have to figure that out. What's ecological for each of us is going to be very different.
And hey, I don't always sleep well, and you may be right. That may be part of why I don't sleep well either. So that's why I say I really need to pay attention to what you say, because often you're very astute about some of these hidden things that are going on.
As are you, Geoffrey. You're very astute too, as is Doug. So Doug, I think, mentions, he gets addicted to it. We can get overly stimulated by this technology and not know how to pace ourselves. And that's part of our own ability to know what's warning signs.
One suggestion that Ariadne, or Maya, as she's states her name, she only listens. She can't stand the video, or doesn't have the bandwidth, whether physically or literally she can't have the connection based on her own shunning of technology. But that was my chosen way of viewing before, was just audio, to where there was no distractions at all, whether it's one face or multiple faces. But at the same time, there is that loss of connection there. So there's so many perspectives to take into account. But we're getting better at it. Not the processing part, but the actual.
Well, I also hopefully I can get better at not wanting to, of letting go of what I learned in face-to-face culture, but rather than in demanding that be, because that just maybe we're in a load. We can't touch here. We don't go out and touch anymore.
Yeah, I have an anecdote about that because you say we only see the face up, right? It's true. So I have this very odd thing that happened to me when I went out to Boulder. Marco.
And you saw everybody.
Marco is smaller in person than he appears to be. And Heather is bigger as a person than she appears to be. Because the way they frame it, Marco is always a bit closer to the camera, so his face is bigger. So I had imagined a quite large person, and he's very small.
That's fascinating.
And Heather always stands back from the camera, and her face is relatively small. And so I imagined someone very small, and she's not big, but she's bigger than I expected, right? So, so I can't wait to meet you, Tony, because I'm not sure what size you are.
Someday. Yeah, that's interesting. That's so interesting. Because sometimes I remember there was a great actor, Laurence Olivier. He was actually a very short man, but you would never know that from seeing him in movies or seeing him on stage, because his imagination was so large. He projected a big guy, but actually he was substandard in height. So that's fascinating.
So we fool ourselves with our virtual presences.
That's wonderful. We have to prepare a face to meet the faces that we meet.
And I have to say,
some days I don't do that.
The quality of my interactions online with both Marco and Heather is an order of magnitude stronger than it was when I didn't know them in person. Right. Now that I've met them in person, I see stuff on the videos and they mean something very different to me now than they did then.
That's interesting.
And so I really think that the actual physical presence, if we can set it up, or even, on one occasion, or it doesn't have to be very often, but just it really makes a difference,
Like to do a group retreat.
Yeah, to do a group retreat. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That would be lovely. Yeah. Someday we'll make that happen.
Yeah.
Sorry, was my audio still on the whole time? Was I clanking around?
No.
So I was thinking while you were talking earlier about the Quaker meeting, I thought, I'd love to go and visit Doug, and I can't remember where you are exactly, but
Lexington, Kentucky. If you ever want to stop by, Lexington Friends meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm really excited about the possibility, and it frightens me just as a shy, reclusive fella, to actually meet the group of people that I love and have stronger connections than a lot of my own family and friends.
That's very weird, isn't it?
It is.
That we get very close relationally, we get very bonded with people in these kind of virtual realities, and they're sort of sometimes more intense than the ones we have with people that we share a real environment with, or an actual environment. It's very confusing to me. I haven't sorted this out.
It's very confusing. I mean, at least here we control the environment, because Infinite Conversations, we collectively have control over the environment. I had experienced in game environments where I was gaming with other people, and I developed fairly strong links to other people, but you're dependent on the company that owns the space. And if the company changes its rules and its regulations, all of a sudden you're out, and you lost those connections that you've invested time, energy, and affection and emotional investment. And it's devastating. So, here, I mean, the connections are much stronger here than they were there, because that was just chat, text chat. But still, you know, you don't want to lose control. You don't want to lose the ability to do this, you know.
Right.
To the level that you can control it, right? So the Batesonian context is relevant here too. So
yeah, I know we have to go, but I think we're doing a very good job, and I think we're maturing as a community. We're getting more and more mature, I'm better able to handle differences, and you know, and releasing sometimes phobic responses and saying, oh yeah, I think this feels like using my somatic intelligence to sort of, oh, okay, I have other options. You know, I don't have to respond in this wounded child fashion, as most of us carry around a lot of baggage. If we can learn how to do that in these public spaces, I think we're benefiting ourselves, but we're also, the benefits ripple outward, I hope, in our, you know, potential discourse events, you know. So, and I see the quality of attention, we still have it. It's not something that we've lost. We have these 2-hour conversations and we're able to share attention. I think a very high level quality of attention. So these predictions that we're all just going to inevitably fragment and divide because we can't pay attention isn't true. We can pay attention. We just need to make that important, that we have these, you know, these spaces where we're going to expect to speak for an hour or 2 hours with a group, and we can do it. I think the content is interesting, and I think we all have our different styles of how to process information. And and we're not getting into these pseudo kind of polarity responses where we're getting really combative, which I see too much happening in this submission dominance in most of our discourse. Is just, I can't watch it anymore. You know, I'll turn on watch a conversation, and if I see these two people starting to get into these unexamined polarities, I turn it off, because it's just a waste of time to see people like the Republicans and the Democrats with these vacuous kind of debates that go nowhere. And I especially enjoy the fact that we're doing something so different here, that gives me confidence that, you know, we can have an influence, and that we don't have to be dominated by the low level of the discourse that's, you know, being circulated by the big media and these neoliberal regimes. That we can use this technology and subvert it for our own purpose. I think this is what Davor and I were talking about last night. So anyway, I think I've said enough. I've had a wonderful time. This has been a lovely discussion.
It's been a lovely discussion about our dynamics as well as debates. Yeah, really interesting.
And I really look forward to it next time, because we're going deeper into biology land. This is going to be a lot of fun.
So you're doing leading next time? I
think I volunteered to do that. And some of the most challenging material is coming up.
And it's a big one, because it's got the two, having 2 articles of Bateson, I think, next week.
I think so. But I've been doing a lot on biosemiotics lately. So I think it will really help focus my attention on these topics, which have fascinated me for many years, but I haven't been able to spend a lot of attention on. So I think this will be an opportunity for me. This assignment will really help me to coordinate a lot of my thinking around this stuff. So thank you all.
Okay. See you all next week.
And Johnny, I know we wanted to talk briefly about the recording from yesterday, so we can do that after the recording's off, maybe.
Okay, you want to talk about that? Sure.
I could turn off the recording, I think. Hang on, let me do that.